No way. Welcome, everyone. I'm Catherine Coles. I'm the Trias director this year, and this is the last Trias reading of the year, curated by our wonderful, incomparable Fall 2014 Trias writer-in-residence, Chris Lonnie. And I am the opening act. I'm going to introduce the introducer of tonight's reading. But before I do, I want to remind you all to turn off your cell phone ringers, even though it's really only old people like me who ever even turn the ringer on in the first place. So old people, turn off your ringers. The rest of you, make sure your phone is, that you're not using it in such a way as to bother people around you or distract them. Also, there will be one more reading this year for the Writers Reading Series, and that's going to be by the poet and hybrid forms artist Brenda Ziskowski. That will be on April 30th in the Blackwell Room at 7:30. There'll be posters, there'll be an email. I just wanted to make sure that one's on your radar because it's going to come later on in the semester. Lots of people and departments go into making the Trias reading series is completely lovely as it is, and I want to thank a few of them. First and foremost, Sue Gage, there she is, who is the only reason my head doesn't fall off and roll away, never to be found again. Thank you, Sue. Thanks to Brian, who generously sells books at all the readings. Just to remind you, books make wonderful, thoughtful gifts, and you can get them signed and personalized at these readings. Thanks to the Buildings and Ground crew who always set up our chairs in the room and the rooms for the readings, and the members of IT who always do the sound for us. Of course, I want to thank the English department, the Provost office, Africana Studies, Spanish and Hispanic Studies, and the Peter Trias Endowment for poetry and writing. That last thing, the Trias Endowment, that's the key here. The thing that makes it so we can have this amazing world-class reading series. The Trias Endowment also makes it so we can have our Trias writer-in-residence every year. How many of you have attended a Trias reading before this year? Awesome, so a whole bunch of you. How many of you studied with or learned from Chris Avani either in the Trias workshop or at a Q&A or some other related event this year? Great, wonderful. So I have learned from Chris Avani. Chris has changed the way that I think about so many things that are important to me, about writing, reading, gender, race, nation, how to be alive, how to be a human being in the world. Some of you had the chance to study with Chris in the Trias workshop fall semester, and I think you can attest with the vigorous nodding of your heads that he's changed you to. I think that class was an amazing experience for those of you who are lucky enough to be in it. That's what Trias gives us, and anyone in this room who is not a graduating senior can submit creative work to Trias to be considered for the fall 2015 Trias workshop with next year's awesome writer-in-residence, who is the poet, essayist, and hybrid forms artist, Mary Ruefel. I sent an email to all the students about this earlier. If you're interested in this class, just email me 3 to 10 pages of your very best creative writing or hybrid forms work in any genre. It doesn't have to be in poetry, it doesn't have to be in Mary Ruefel's genre. My address is kcoles@hws.edu. You can look me up on the English department webpage, but make sure you get that K first, because poor Bob Cowles in the music department has a really, really hard time with receiving lots of my emails. So if you wanted to get to me, it's due tomorrow, by the end of the day tomorrow. So that's your ultimate deadline for this. But this is a seriously cool opportunity. We're going to send permission codes to the 15 lucky people who get to be in that class right before registration. And so that you'll have it before registration, but definitely try for it. There's no prerequisite. Sophomores are just as welcome as seniors, but you do have to write your way into the class. But give it a try. See if you can get into this class. It really is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Each of these Trias workshops are amazing for their own reason. Okay, so I want to pass the mic to Chris Avani so he can introduce Nnedi Okorafor. But first, I want to thank him, and I want you to help me thank him for a wonderful year, a moving year, a trickster year, a learning year, for challenging us and giving us permission, for making it always about more than just the writing. We are so lucky to have had you, Chris. Thank you so much.
Good evening, friends. Not my friends anymore. Yeah. I just wanted to also say thank you to everyone. Sue, I can't emphasize how amazing Sue is. She's a magician. Like I arrive in the middle of the night, like on Tuesday night, and somehow there's fresh coffee, there's bread, there's food. It's amazing. And so many other ways in which she takes care of us. But I want to thank everyone in the English department who've been really good friends to me this year. But the students I taught, I want to thank them because in as much as teachers can challenge you, you challenge us, and in a way, every time we have to find new ways to explain things, you make us deeper people. So I'm going to say thank you, and it's not over. You have my email address. Some of you even have my phone number. Give it also drop to nights. No, I don't drink, but I'm happy to buy. It gives me a lot of pleasure to introduce Nnedi Okorafor for our last reader of the series. In many ways, for me, this is a beautiful kind of way in which the whole reading has been bookended between poets and novelists and diasporic and non-diasporic. But in all of the conversations we've had, America and West Africa have always been part of these conversations. And part of it for me is my sincere belief that we like to think we're all different, but we're not really. I mean, we're specifically odd, each of us, but we're not really different. For me, pretty much, I think of the world as like the Cylons from Battlestar Galactica. There's a limited template, and we tend to reproduce those templates. And this reading series, if nothing else, has shown that these concerns work together. So there's a lot I can say about Nnedi Okorafor. That she's funny, complicated, strong, very open and vulnerable, kind, committed to new writers, firmly unapologetic and fiercely confident about her artistic vision, and yet she has this capacity to listen deeply for careful and useful critiques, and she will make profound changes in her work to accommodate those critiques. She's driven by a deep sense of craft and excellence in narrative, and in some cases, as we found out today in a wonderful conversation earlier, undertakes as many as 60 rewrites on a specific novel, and in one case was able to trim 760 pages of a novel to a 398-page book. This kind of vulnerability and all the things we share today in the room are really important for younger writers as they emerge to realize that everyone shares the same difficulty, and it doesn't matter where you are in your career, the conversation about craft continues to evolve. She often includes graphics and drawings in her work, hates categorization like sci-fi or speculative fiction, and yet is at home in both genres. Often to the heart of purists, she will blend genres and styles and forms. She is primarily focused on the range and capability of the human imagination to conceive and execute stories that will not limit herself or her readers in any shape or form. In the very work she makes, she gives us all permission. Nnedi's work, while in genres and in styles not often thought of as political, very much is political. Her work is often about deeply flawed humans in compromising and challenging situations, trying to figure the balance between ethics and need, commerce and danger, and the pressures of the community on the individual, and likewise the obligation of the individual to the collective. The way she works with gender is only comparable perhaps to the way Octavia Butler would work with gender. The way she foregrounds women in her work, not as though she's fighting against patriarchy, but as though patriarchy has always just been there. It's such a sleight of hand that it takes a while to realize how adeptly she pulls this off. For an African writer from a continent that is torn by a strange kind of schizophrenic Christianity and Islam, her work, like J.K. Rowling's in the US, has been called witchcraft. Corrupting, dangerous, subversive, which are all high praise, no doubt. But in this case, for a woman, also carries the danger of real risk for the writer's body, not only becoming the target, but then the terrain of the feedback. But with wit, great snappy and funny comebacks, she handles her critics and continues to soldier on. What she is doing is important because not only is her work accessible to young Americans in ways that defeat the notion of exoticism and difference, because the form is often very familiar, but she's creating a hybrid form and a blend of African mythologies and a modern diasporic experience that offers an archive that will help all young and hyphenated Americans find themselves within the mythology of belonging. She's a novelist, of science fiction, fantasy, magic realism, flying women, and no, she can't fly, I asked already, for both children and adults. She's born in the United States to two Nigerian immigrant parents. She's known for weaving, as I was saying, African culture into these creative, evocative settings and memorable characters. And there is a profile of her work titled Weapons of Mass Creation, where in the New York Times, her imagination is described simply as stunning. She has multiple novels. They're all available for sale. Please help me in giving a warm cheers welcome to Nnedi Okorafor.
Wow, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. It's wonderful to be here tonight. And tonight, this will be the first time that I read from my new forthcoming novel, The Book of Phoenix, so that will be very interesting. I'm going to read just a tiny paragraph from it. I'm going to read from 3 of my novels today, and I'm going to try to tie them all together somehow. All right, and so I'm going to read from Who Fears Death. I'm going to read a tiny bit of the Book of Phoenix, and I'm going to read a chunk of Lagoon. And so to start off with, I want to say that I hear voices, and that's typically not something you want to say, especially when you come from a Nigerian family. But that's how I wrote the novel, Who Fears Death in particular. But Who Fears Death, which is my third novel, it started off with darkness. Who Fears Death started off with the passing of my father in 2004. My family was very close, and my father was sick for many years. He was sick for about 5 years. My father was a cardiovascular surgeon. He was a heart surgeon. He was chief of surgery in Chicago. And he suffered from Parkinson's disease, and Parkinson's makes you shake. And when you're a surgeon, you need your steady hands. That's what makes you who you are. So he had Parkinson's. He suffered from diabetes, and he eventually passed due to congestive heart failure. So the irony of that just left me very, very angry, and because it all just seemed extremely unfair. And so when he passed, I just had a really hard time. I had a hard time just even dealing with myself. And so on the day of his wakekeeping, there was a time, I don't know how it happened, I think it was near the end, after everyone had left. For some reason, I found myself standing in front of my father's body. And I remember looking down at him and thinking that didn't look like him anymore. And then I remember just feeling something kind of growing in me. It was like this strength and this power was building in me, and it felt really, really destructive. And I remember at some point my mom and my sisters coming in there and kind of pulling me out of there immediately. And so it was that evening, right after his wakekeeping, that I wrote what turned out to be the beginning of Who Fears Death. And Who Fears Death is, I don't know what you call it. Some say it's science fiction, some say it's fantasy, magical realism, whatever. But it's so full of memoir and realistic and realism as a whole. And so this opening chapter, which moved around many times as I rewrote the book over and over and over again, and ended up being the beginning of the book. So I'm going to read the chapter 1 of Who Fears Death, and you'll see how it connects. Part 1, Becoming. Chapter 1, The Face of My Father. My life fell apart when I was 16. Papa died. He had such a strong heart, yet he died. Was it the heat and the smoke from his blacksmithing shop? It's true that nothing can take him from his work, his art. He loved to make the metal bend and obey him, but his work only seemed to strengthen him. He was so happy in his shop. So what was it that killed him? To this day, I can't be sure. I hope it had nothing to do with me or what I did back then. Immediately after he died, my mother came running out of their bedroom, sobbing and throwing herself against the wall. I knew then that I would be different. I knew in that moment I would never again be able to control the fire inside me. I became a different creature that day, not so human. Everything that happened later, I now understand, started then. The ceremony was held outside in the middle of the day. It was already terribly hot. His body lay on a thick white cloth, surrounded by a garland of braided palm fronds. I knelt there in the sand before his body, saying my last goodbye. I'll never forget his face. It didn't look like Papa's anymore. Papa's skin was dark brown, his lips were full. This face had sunken cheeks, deflated lips, and skin like gray-brown paper. Papa's spirit had gone elsewhere. The back of my neck prickled. My white veil was a poor protection from people's ignorant, fearful eyes. By this time, everyone was always watching me. I clenched my jaw. Around me, women were on their knees weeping and wailing. Papa was dearly loved despite the fact that he'd married my mother, a woman with a daughter like me, an heirloom daughter. That had long been excused as one of those mistakes even the greatest man can make. Over the wailing, I heard my mother's soft whimper. She had suffered the greatest loss. Now it was her turn to have her last moments. Afterwards, they'd take him for cremation. I looked down at his face one last time. I'll never see you again, I thought. I wasn't ready. I blinked and touched my chest. That was when it happened, when I touched my chest. At first, it felt like an itchy tingle, and it quickly swelled into something more. The more I tried to get up, the more intense it grew, and the more my grief expanded. They can't take him, I thought frantically. There's still so much metal left in his shop. He hasn't finished his work. The sensation spread through my chest and radiated out through the rest of my body. I rounded my shoulders to hold it in. And then I started pulling it from people around me. I shuddered and gnashed my teeth. I was filling with rage. Oh, not here, I thought. Not at Papa's ceremony. Life wouldn't leave me alone long enough to even mourn my dead father. Behind me, the wailing stopped. All I heard was a gentle breeze. It was utterly eerie. Something was below my feet, in the ground, or maybe somewhere else. Suddenly, I was slammed with the pain of emotions of everyone around me, for Papa. On instinct, I laid my hands on his arm. People started screaming. I didn't turn around. I was too focused on what I had to do. Nobody tried to pull me away. No one touched me. My friend Louis' uncle was once struck by lightning during a rare dry season Ungwa storm. He survived, but he couldn't stop talking about how it felt like being violently shaken from the inside out. That's how I felt now. I gasped with horror. I couldn't take my hand from Papa's arm. It was fused to him. My sand-colored skin tapered to his gray-brown skin from my palm, a mound of mingled flesh. I started screaming. It caught in my throat and I coughed, and then I stared. Papa's chest was slowly moving, up, down, up, down. He was breathing. I was both repulsed and desperately hopeful. I took a deep breath and cried, "Live, Papa, live!" A pair of hands settled on my wrists. I knew exactly whose they were. One of his fingers was broken and bandaged. If he didn't get his hands off me, I'd hurt him far worse than I had 5 days prior. "Onyesomu," Aro said into my ear, quickly taking his hands from my wrists. Oh, how I hated him. But I listened. "He's gone," he said. "Let go so we can all be free of it." Somehow, I did. I let go of Papa. Everything went dead, silent again, as if the world for a moment were submerged in water. Then the power that had built up inside of me burst. My veil was blown back from my head, and my free braids whipped back. Everything and everyone was thrown back. Aro, my mother, family, friends, acquaintances, strangers, the table of food, the 50 yams, the 13 large monkey breadfruits, the 5 cows, the 10 goats, the 30 hens, and so much sand. Back in town, the power went off for 30 seconds. Houses would need to be swept of sand and the computers would be taken in for dust damage. That underwater-like silence again. I looked down at my hand. When I tried to remove it from Papa's cold, still dead arm, there was a sound of peeling, like weak glue flaking off. My hand left a silhouette of dried mucus on Papa's arm. I rubbed my fingers together. More of the stuff crackled and peeled from between them. I took one more look at Papa, then I fell over to the side and passed out. That was 4 years ago. Now see me. People here know that I caused it all. They want to see my blood. They want to make me suffer, and then they want to kill me. Whatever happens after this, let me stop. Tonight you want to know how I came to be what I am. You want to know how I got here. It's a long story. But I'll tell you. You're a fool if you believe anything that the others say about me. I tell you my story to avert all those lies. And thankfully, even my long story will fit on that laptop of yours. I have 2 days. I hope it's enough time. You will all catch up with me soon. My mother named me Onisomu. It means who fears death. She named me well. I was born 20 years ago during troubled times. Ironically, I grew up far from all of the killing. So that's chapter 1 of Who Fears Death. And Onisomu, which means who fears death, as I just said, she was a very demanding muse when I wrote her. Her story was both very dynamic and disturbing and oddly familiar. And her story was just what I needed during that time, during that extremely painful time. And what's interesting is that, aside from the fact that she was a dictator, dictator of a muse, she did not let me go until I had that story written down. And I wrote that story, oh my gosh, I had to edit that story so much, because it needed to be perfect. But what was really interesting was that after Who Fears Death came out, after writing the ending of that book, oh my goodness, that book, the ending was something else. I had told myself I would never return to that world again. Who Fears Death is one of those books where it was a very difficult novel to write. And when it was done, I felt like I had gotten something out of me, and I just did not want to go back to it. And then little did I know that years later, I'd returned to Onisomu's world. And so, it's the Book of Phoenix is not a sequel, it's actually a prequel. It's 100 years from now, about 400 years before Onisomu's time. But once again, we've got another narrator who was a bit of a dictator, And so, though the Book of Phoenix happens about 300 years before Onisomu's time, and it begins with an old man in a desert who comes across a cave full of ancient computers. And this is after something has happened that has brought the world that has brought the end of technology. And that's the world of Who Fears Death. And so when he finds this cave of computers, instead of running away, he's curious and he goes in. And he's got this portable device that he uses to communicate with his wife. This is a very old man. And when he's in that cave, something happens on his portable device, and something is wirelessly uploaded onto that device, and that turns out to be the Great Book, and within the Great Book is the Book of Phoenix. So eventually he sits down and starts listening to it, and he starts, the chapter that he settles on is this woman's rushed voice who starts speaking to him. And so I'm going to read the first. It's maybe about a paragraph of the Book of Phoenix, just the intro. And this is, okay, yeah, it's sort of the intro. It's the first time that Phoenix starts talking to this old man, whose name is Suntu. There is no book about me, the voice said. Well, not yet. No matter. I shall create it for myself. It's better that way. To tell you my story, I'll use the old African tools of story, spoken words. They're worthier of my trust and they'll last longer. and during shadowy times, spoken words carry farther than words typed, imaged, or written. My beginnings were in the dark. We all dwelled in the dark, mad scientist and specimen alike. A dear friend of mine would say that this time was when the goddess Nnedi still slept. I call my story the Book of Phoenix. It's reliable and short because it was accelerated. So that's Phoenix, just starting her story. And so, as I said before, I hear voices. And when I say I hear voices, I literally hear them. And Phoenix came to me, her voice was different from Onyesonwu in that hers was more urgent and hers was really, really relentless. Like she literally would not let me rest. She literally would not let me sleep. So eventually I ended up returning to the world of Who Fears Death, of Onyesonwu as well. So now I want to change the pace a little bit, and I want to read from my novel Lagoon, and I want to put these Who Fears Death and the Book of Phoenix and Lagoon next to each other because I wrote Lagoon in a very different state of mind. I started writing Lagoon in a very happier state for once. And what inspired Lagoon? Okay, so Lagoon, in a nutshell, is an alien invasion happening in the city of Lagos, Nigeria. And I started writing it after seeing the movie District 9. I don't know if anyone else has seen that. And District 9 is the first big budget film set in, it's really the first big budget African science fiction film. And when I went to see this, I was really excited, and I waited. I went to see it on the day that it came out. And then as the movie progressed, my smile got smaller and smaller and smaller, and then turned into an angry face. And so, District 9, the thing about District 9 that really stood out to me was its portrayal of Nigerians. It had a very obnoxious, negative, prejudiced, problematic portrayal of Nigerians. And so after seeing District 9, I started thinking about the anger that I felt got me thinking about aliens and Nigerians, and how would Nigerians really react to an alien invasion? And so that kind of got the ball rolling. And then I started talking about it with a friend of mine who was Nollywood is Nigerian's film industry. It's the second biggest film industry in the world, the first being Bollywood, the third being Hollywood. So I was speaking to a Nigerian Nollywood director, and we were talking about District 9 and how angry it made us. And he was like, yeah, if aliens ever came to Nigeria, the first thing that Nigerians would do is try to make the aliens start printing Naira notes and euros. And so as soon as he said that, the wheels just started turning faster and faster and faster. And so, of course, when I thought about aliens landing in Nigeria, the first place that I thought about was Lagos, which is one of Africa's biggest cities, and probably will be one of the biggest cities in the world in the near future, I'm thinking. So, and Lagos, I have a special relationship with Lagos that revolves around fear. So it just seemed like the perfect place for me to set this story. And so as I wrote it, it moved totally away from anything that had to do with District 9 and just became a lot more, and it just kind of pulled in a lot more. So I'm going to read, let me see, I think I have time. I'm going to read chapters 1 and 2 of Lagoon, which have a very different feel from Who Fears Death and the Book of Phoenix. Okay, and Lagoon starts off with a little quote, or not a quote, but like there's a voice in Lagoon that runs throughout the book. So it starts off with that voice. Welcome to Lagos, Nigeria. The city takes its name from the Portuguese word for lagoon. The Portuguese first landed on Lagos Island in the year 1472. Apparently they could not come up with a more creative name, nor did they think to ask one of the natives for a suggestion. And so the world turns, masked by millions of names, guises, and shifting stories. It's been a beautiful thing to watch. My designs grow complex. You learn by the end of the story who that was. Okay, so I'm going to skip the prologue. The prologue starts off with I've always been tired of alien invasion and first contact narratives that start off with the aliens meeting human beings as if they're the only thing on this planet. So I wanted to write a first contact where it was not a human being. So in Lagoon, the first contact happens with a swordfish who was attacking an oil pipeline. There was indeed a swordfish that was attacking an oil pipeline that I read about. And I felt that swordfish deserved a story. So the prologue starts off with this swordfish that is attacking an oil pipeline, and then right after it sticks its sword into the pipeline and pulls it out and is like, yeah, you know, now these human beings will not be coming back. It encounters the aliens right after that, and there's a great boom sound that obliterates all of the small creatures around it, but not the big ones. And then after that, the swordfish meets these aliens in the water. So that's the prologue. And the prologue is from the swordfish's point of view. Okay. Chapter 1, Fist. It was an eerie moment as Adora and the two strange men arrived at that spot right before it happened. Exactly 3 yards from the water at exactly 11:55 p.m., January 8, 2010. Adora came from the north side of the beach. The tall veiled man came from the east. The bloodied man wearing army fatigues from the west. They ambled in their general directions, eyeing each other as it became clear that their paths would intersect. Only Adora hesitated. Then, like the others, she pressed on. She was a born and raised Lagosian, and she was wearing nicely fitted jeans and a sensible blouse. She spent more time walking this beach than probably both of these men combined. She wiped the tears from her cheeks and trained her eyes straight ahead. About a quarter of a mile away was open water where the Atlantic overflowed its banks. When bad things happened, her feet always brought her here, to Lagos's Bar Beach. In many ways, Bar Beach was a perfect sampling of Nigerian society. It was a place of mixing. The ocean mixed with the land and the wealthy mixed with the poor. Bar Beach attracted drug dealers, squatters, various accents and languages, seagulls, garbage, biting flies, tourists, all kinds of religious zealots, hawkers, prostitutes, johns, water-loving children, and their careless parents. The beachside bars and small restaurants were the most popular hangout spots. Bar Beach's waters were too wild for any serious swimming. Even the best swimmers risked a watery death by its many rip currents. Adora had removed her sandals. It was deep night, and this was probably a bad idea. So far, however, she hadn't stepped on any pieces of wood or rusty nails, broken glass, or sharp stones. Her need to feel the cool in between her toes at this moment outweighed the risk. Despite its trash, there was still something sacred about Bar Beach. On June 12, 1993, the day of the most democratic election in Nigeria's history, that may have changed a few days ago, she'd come here with her father and watched him shed tears of joy. On June 23rd, her mother brought her here because her father and uncles were at home cursing and shouting over the military annulling those elections. She came here to escape the reality that her best friend was sleeping with her biology professor to earn a passing grade. On the day that she received her PhD in marine biology from the University of Lagos, she came here to thank the powers that be for helping her stay sane enough to finish her degree, and for the fact that she hadn't had to sleep with anyone to earn it. Last year, she'd come here to weep when her father was killed, along with 30 others during a botched robbery of a luxury bus on the Lagos-Benin Expressway, one of Nigeria's many, many dangerous roads. The thieves had demanded that all the passengers get off of the bus and lie in the momentarily empty road. In their stupidity, the thieves hadn't anticipated the truck speeding to avoid armed robbers that would run over everyone, including the thieves. And now Adora was here at Bar Beach, because her loving, perfect husband of 10 years had hit her, slapped her really hard, all because of a hip-hop concert and a priest. At first she stood there stunned and hurt, cupping her cheek and praying the children hadn't heard. Then she brought her hand up and slapped him right back. Shocked into rage, her husband had leaped on her, but Adora had been ready for him. By this time, she wasn't thinking about the children. She didn't know how long she and her husband had scuffled like wild dogs on the floor. And the way the fight had ended, it wasn't normal. One minute they were brawling, and then the next her husband was mysteriously stuck to the floor, his wrists and ankles held down as though by powerful magnets. As he'd screamed and twisted, Adora had gotten up, grabbed her keys, and run out of the house. Thankfully, their Victoria Island home was only minutes from Bar Beach. She rubbed her swollen cheek. Even on her dark skin, the redness would be visible. She set her jaw and tried to ignore the two men coming from her right and left as she walked towards the ocean. After what she just dealt with, she wasn't about to let any man get in her way. Still, as she got closer, she ventured a glance at the two of them. She frowned. The man in the military uniform looked like he'd already seen plenty pepper. He reminded Adora of a whipped lion. Blood dribbled from his nose, and he wasn't bothering to wipe it away. And half of his face was swollen, yet he had a harsh, unshaken look in his eye. The other man was a tall, dark-skinned scarecrow of a fellow wearing a black and white veil. Maybe he was a Muslim. He was scrutinizing the approaching beat-up-looking soldier more than he was her. Each of them walked in their respective straight lines, each heading towards each other. Adora squinted at the man in the veil. What is it about him, she thought, as she walked towards the sea. Something. But she didn't slow her gait. And so the three of them met. The tall man was the first to speak. Excuse, tell me this isn't a joke, Adora interrupted, as she realized what it was about the man. Are you, can I ask you? The tall man looked deeply annoyed and removed his veil and sighed. I am, he said, cutting her off. But don't call me Anthony de Craze. I'm just out for a post-concert stroll. Tonight just call me Edgar. Now wow, she exclaimed, laughing, reaching up to touch her throbbing cheek. You wore that scarf on your album cover, didn't you? After what had happened at home, it felt surprisingly good to laugh. I was supposed to be at your concert, tonight. At some point, her husband, Chris, had changed his mind about letting her go to the Anthony de Craze concert with her best friend, Yemi, because he barred her way when she tried to leave. Since when do I need your permission to do anything anyway, she said to her husband, taken aback. Then came the slap. Please, be gone, the bloody military man said, snatching his green beret from his smoothly shaven head and squeezing it in his shaking hands. Do either of you have a mobile phone? I must call my father. I will pay you well. Adora barely registered his words. She was now really looking at him. Up close he looked not only injured, but in deep, deep distress. The blood running from his nose glistened in the dim mix of street and moonlight. She took her hand from her burning cheek and reached out to him. Hey, buddy, Anthony said, looking at the military man with concern. He brought out his mobile phone. You are bleeding, oh. Do you need help? Are you all? No, the military man snapped. I am not all right. Adora jumped back, unconsciously bringing her fist up. Do I look all right? He shouted. He motioned for Anthony's mobile phone. I need to make this phone call right now. My fam. Boom. Anthony dropped his mobile phone as all three of them dropped to the ground, their hands over their heads. Adora found herself looking from the bleeding military man to Anthony in terror. It was not the type of sound one heard on Bar Beach or in any part of Lagos. On Bar Beach, the loudest thing was typically some woman shouting at a man or someone's old car backfiring on a nearby road. This booming sound was so deep Adora could feel it in her chest and it rattled her teeth. It left cotton in her ears. It was so wide that it seemed to have its own physical weight. Adora glanced around and saw that the noise pushed everything to the ground. A few feet away, two seagulls dropped from the night sky to the sand, stunned. Something black bounced off of Anthony's head and fell beside him. Bat? Adora asked. Everything was muffled as if she were speaking from underwater. Anthony looked at it closely. The bat was furry-bodied and beady-eyed with black wings. It wiggled a bit, still alive. He scooped up the poor creature and grabbed Adora's hand. He nudged the military man's shoulder as he cradled the stunned animal. "Come on," he shouted. "That came from the water. We should go away from here." But something was happening to the ocean. The waves were rolling irregularly. Each time the waves broke on the beach, they reached further and further up the sand. Then a 4-foot wave rose up. Adora was so fascinated that she just stood there staring. Anthony stopped pulling her and pushing the military man. The blood ran from the military man's eyes as he tried to focus his gaze on the darkness of the water. The wave was heading right for them, fast and quiet as a whisper. It was closer than 10 feet now. Finally, the three of them turned and ran, and the fist of water was faster. Adora grabbed the military man's hand. Anthony threw the bat to what he hoped was safety, and then leaped and grabbed Adora's legs just as the water fell on them. Plash! The salty water stung Adora's eyes and pulled at her garments as it sucked her towards the sea. Her hands scrambled at the sand as it collapsed beneath her, the pebbles raking at her skin, the sea sucking at her legs. She could still feel the desperate grasp of the military man's hands and Anthony's arms around her legs. She wasn't alone. In the blackness, she could see some of the lights from the bars and the nearby buildings. They were flickering and glowing, smaller and smaller. Bubbles tickled at her ears as she tried to twist to the surface, but it was as if the ocean had opened its great maw and swallowed her and the two men. She couldn't breathe. She heard bubbles and the roar and rush of water against her ears, and she could feel the tightness of her laboring lungs and the suction of the water. Aman Imam, Adora weakly thought. The phrase meant water is life in the Tuareg language of Tamashek. She'd once worked with a Tuareg man on a diving expedition. Aman Imam had been his answer when Adora asked how a man from the Sahara Desert became an expert scuba diver. Despite the pain in her lungs, now, in the swallowing darkness, she smiled. Aman Imam. The three of them grasped each other, and down, down, down they went. Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is very short. The boy and the lady. Only 2 people on the beach witnessed the watery abduction of Adora and the 2 men. One was a young boy. Just before the boom, his guardian had been standing several feet away having a heated discussion with the owner of one of the shacks selling mineral, mainly orange Fanta and Coca-Cola. The boy was staring at something else. His stomach was growling, but he forgot his hunger for the moment. In the moonlight, he couldn't clearly see the creature, but as it walked out of the water, even he knew it was not human. All his mind would register was the word smoke, at least until the creature walked up to the quiet beach and stepped into the flickering light from one of the restaurants. By then it had become a naked, dark-skinned African woman with long black braids. She reminded the boy of a woman whose purse he once stolen. She'd stood there for several moments, watching the 3 people who came from their 3 different directions and ended up standing before each other. Then the strange woman creature silently ran back to the water and dove in like Namiwata. Rubbing his itchy head, the boy decided that he was seeing things, as he often did when he grew confused. He flared his nostrils and breathed through his mouth as he tried to focus back on reality. The great booming sound rattled his brain even more, and then came the wave that looked like the hand of a powerful water spirit. The boy saw it take 3 people, 1 who was a woman and 2 who were men, and just before it did, he saw one of those people throw a black bird into the air that caught itself and flew into the night. Nevertheless, he could not speak or even process any of this information, for he was both mute and mentally handicapped. He stared at where the 3 people had been and now were not, and then he smiled, saliva glistening in the left corner of his mouth, because somewhere deep in his restrained brain, he had the profound understanding that things around him were about to change forever, and he liked this idea very much. The other witness of the abduction was a young woman named Fasayo. She was a hard-working, book-reading secretary by day and a prostitute by night. She too noticed the creature woman who emerged from the water, and she too thought the word smoke, but she also thought shapeshifter. "I am seeing the devil," she whispered to herself. She turned away and dropped to her knees. She was wearing a short, tight skirt, and the sand was warm and soft on her shins and kneecaps. She prayed to the Lord Jesus Christ to forgive her for all of her sins and take her to heaven, for surely this was the rapture. When the boon came, she shut her eyes and tried to pray harder. The pain of death would be her atonement, but deep down she knew she was a sinner and there was nothing that would ever wipe that away. She got to her feet and turned around just in time to see the woman and the two men snatched up by a huge fist of water. Just before it happened, one of them released something black and evil into the air like a poison. She stood there staring at that spot where they had been and no longer were. She waited for the water to take her too. The fist had to be the hand of Satan, and she was one of the biggest sinners of all. Oh, the things she had done so many, many times, sometimes just to fill her belly. She trembled and started sweating. Her armpits prickled. She hated her tiny skirt, tight tank top, red pumps, and the itchy, straight-haired brown wig on her head. When nothing else happened, she went to the nearest bar and ordered a cranberry and vodka. She would anxiously tell her next John, a businessman from the United States, what she had seen. But he wasn't interested in anything she had to say. He was more interested in filling her mouth than watching it flap with useless, dumb words. But Fasayo wouldn't forget, and when it all started, she would become one of the loudest prophets of doom in Lagos. Thank you. So that was the beginning of Lagoon, and to bring it back to the theme of voices, where the Book of Phoenix and Who Fears Death are both very strong voices of one. Lagoon is the exact opposite, where it's the voice of many. It's the voice of many different characters. It's from the point of view of many different characters, and some human, some not human, some animals. There's the point of view of a swordfish, there's a point of view of a tarantula, and there's a point of view of a bat, of course. If a bat is mentioned, the bat comes back. And we get the plants, because the way I look at it, if aliens come, they're not just going to meet the human beings, they're going to meet everybody. And that everybody includes also the spirits, and the ancestors, and the deities. So yeah, Lagoon is a lot of things. So does anyone have any questions? Yes?
I'm curious, why did you want to set your stories in Africa other than creating the South world?
Why did I want to set this, which one, in Lagoon or?
Well, Lagoons and
Okay, well, as I said before, that, the inspiration of Lagoon was after seeing District 9 and considering Nigerians how would Nigerians react to an alien invasion, and then I kind of focused on Lagos, because Lagos is a really lively, vibrant city full of so much. And so it seemed it's the perfect place to set a story. In terms of why do I set so many of my stories in Africa, I don't really have an answer to that. It might be because I'm African, so then there's that. But I know from the very first story that I wrote, first story that I wrote was set in Nigeria. It's just sort of an intuitive thing. It's just where my muse goes. And one of the things that I often say is that my muse is Nigeria. It's rooted in Nigeria. I know exactly which village it is rooted in. So, and that wasn't something that I chose. It's just something that is. And so that kind of expands to the stories that I write. Yeah.
How do you begin structuring and sustaining the book of many characters? Or many perspectives, rather?
Yeah, it's interesting because typically the type of story that I typically like to write, one character and one point of view. I just like that. I like reading that type of narrative, and I like writing that type of narrative. I read a book by Stephen King called Under the Dome, and Under the Dome takes place in many points of views. And when I read that, I was like, oh my God, I want to try that. That's just so cool. And to be able to sustain the story from the multiple points of views, it just seemed like a challenge that I wanted to try. And so one of the things that I that kind of helped me in terms of writing multiple points of view is that I'm not a linear writer. I write in many, I'll write the ending and then the middle, and I just jump around, so there's that. And I also tend to write, I write episodically, so that helped as well. So it was like, writing Lagoon was more like putting a puzzle together, you know, as opposed to writing something that was where you knew exactly where it was going. And also, Lagoon is looking at one thing, one event that happens, and then showing it from multiple points of view. So having that one event kind of helped me keep the, there was a cohesiveness that I was able to maintain because of that. So that helped too. But it was definitely something new for me. And it was not a linear, writing Lagoon was not a linear thing. And the voices, I would write, it was almost like writing a series of short stories that were all interconnected, and then I connected them even more, and that's how it became the novel. Yeah, it's a very different process. Other questions? Yeah.
In those excerpts, there were very strong multifaceted female characters, and I was wondering what role feminism plays in your writing process.
A big role, since I am a feminist. But I don't write stories so that I can go on a feminist rant. I do that on Twitter. The story is like the feminism naturally comes in. And also, one of the things that I am very concerned with writing are strong, complex, flawed, powerful female characters. That is something that and that's in looking at myself, looking at my work after I've done it, and realizing that that's something that I like. It wasn't something that I set out to do, but it was something that I subconsciously did. And also add the word destructive too. I notice female characters that I write always destroy a lot of things. Yeah. So that's and I think so I think that the feminism just naturally comes through because I am a feminist and I have strong views and ideas, and that's kind of reflected in the work. Yeah.
Well, Chris mentioned that you once edited a book, edited 1,000 pages into a 300-page book. I'm just wondering what it looked like.
Yeah, that was Who Fears Death. Who Fears Death was originally 2 books, and my agent was like, you need to get this down, you need the same book, same everything, but it needs to be shorter. And the process of shortening that was really difficult. You know, and I went through the whole manuscript and looked at every single word and took out any word that didn't need to be there. And then combined weak phrases into strong words, like very big, it would become huge. You know, and so I went through, and it took me 2.5 years to do that, you know, to get it all down. And then even after I finished it, even after I got it down to 389 pages, I still continued editing it again and again and again. I edit a lot. I work in edits. When I initially write something, I spit it out. I don't stop. Even if I know that I changed the character's name halfway through, or changed the character's career or something halfway through, I keep going and get all the way to the end. I've learned that in Microsoft Word, you can have too many typos. You can have so many typos that it will shut spell check off and be like, you need to do something about this, and you're not doing the same. Yeah, I know that. I've learned that many times, because when I have the first draft, I just spit it out. And I don't go back and I don't spell check. I don't do any of that until I get to the end, and then I go back and so because of that, because I write like that, where I go into the zone, and there are times where I can write a whole chapter, and I'll look it over and be like, I don't even remember writing that, but it's good. You know? So because I write like that, I have to edit a lot. I'm the type of writer who has to edit a lot, and this is even before it gets sold. By the time it gets sold, then my editor will do the usual thing that editors do, so then I have to edit again and again and again. So I'm used to that long process. So when my agent came to me and was like, you know what, I think you need to do this, I don't remember, well, I had one night of just not sleeping and freaking out about that, and then I accepted it, and then just got to work. you know, and I've always been like that, where I can hear a sort of criticism that where the criticism is asking me to do something huge, and I'm open enough to hear it and consider it, which a lot of writers, that's hard to do. And once I've considered it, and if I deem it worthy, and if I agree with it, I'm not averse to doing the work and the suffering. And so Who Fears Death was that, you know, he was like, you know, I know you just put in how many years of work into this thing, 'cause Who Fears Death took me 6 years to write, but you're gonna need to do more. And so, yeah, that process, Who Fears Death is the most edited book I've written. But I learned, because I did that, my process got faster. So the next book that I didn't make the same mistakes that led me to writing that big monster, and so my process got a little more streamlined, so, yeah. Any other questions? Okay, first, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Your work is fabulous. I'm just curious, what authors inspire you? I mean, you mentioned Stephen King, but particularly Nigerian or African authors, or just any in general?
Yeah, a lot of Nigerian authors have inspired me, but the one that inspired me the most is Ben Okri. Easily Ben Okri. Famished Road was like, I read that, I didn't read it in a class, because I didn't read much African literature in my undergrad, but a friend of mine was taking an African literature course, and he had Famished Road, and he wasn't doing the reading, and he had just this book lying around, and I'm like, can I read that? So I took it, and I read that book, and just on my own time, and it blew my mind. Like, it was the book that I felt that gave me permission to do what I wanted to do. Because there was a passage, and there are many, he's like the most quotable author on earth. He speaks in quotes. But there was an image, especially in particular, of Masquerade in Famished Road. Masquerades are, just go on to explain. Masquerades are manifestations of the ancestors and spirits. That's the only simple way to describe them. They're men in costumes, but they're manifestations of the ancestors and spirits. So when the men put these costumes on, they become that ancestor or spirit. And some of the costumes are very, very elaborate. Some of them are very terrifying. And growing up, I've had interesting interactions with masquerades, especially being an American Nigerian, because whenever we go to Nigeria, the masquerades would come out, especially on Christmas and Easter, and they would harass my sisters and I the most. Like, they'd chase us down the street with a whip. So I always had that, and so that was something. The masquerades were always really central to just my creative process and my work. And so it was when I was reading Famished Road, in that passage where he describes a masquerade like bursting out of a forest on a horse or something like that. And it was the first time where I saw a masquerade described exactly how I imagined them. I'm like, this is what they're not men in costumes, they are real, like really real. And so that just blew up, and when I read that, I'm like, okay, I can, like I said, it was like permission. So definitely Ben Okri. I have many favorite Nigerian authors. I just there are many that I love, but it was Ben Okri who really shaped me the most. Yeah.
So you've talked a lot about having like an insider-outsider status in a lot of different worlds, or having a foot in two different worlds and being not quite too Nigerian to be American, too American to be Nigerian, and so that I'm wondering how that kind of marginal position has turned into something powerful for you in writing.
Yeah, I think that there are certain things that because I'm an insider, outsider, have that status where, like, I know things, but I'm not accepted, and I'm accepted here sometimes, but not, because of that, so it builds in a certain insecurity, within me, like, of identity that I've had to really grapple with over the years, and that insecurity has led to me having a curiosity, a especially about culture, especially Nigerian culture, Igbo culture in particular, and wanting to explore the past and wanting to just learn more about that which I'm not fully a part of. So that interest has led me to be interested in cultural aspects that I think Igbos who are easily accepted are not curious about, because it's just so everyday to them. It's not unique to them in any way. So because I've had that interest and that curiosity, that's where you get like this research into those things that are often considered taboo or not discussed anymore, all that. So, and then those are things that eventually make their way into my fiction. So I think that outsider curiosity, but being an insider with access, has given me this unique perspective to write the things that I write, and also you could say naivete or bravery, because there's certain things that I write about that those who are just comfortable on the inside and fully accept would not write about. They'd be nervous about writing about that. But for me, I'm just like, because it doesn't hold, it holds that weight, but it doesn't, there's something that I didn't grow up with, a sort of fear that I didn't grow up with, that kind of allows me to just bypass that and just write about it and not be afraid of it and put it out there. So I think it gives me a certain amount of freedom as well. So yeah, I think in that way it's empowering. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you all for coming.